President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former terrorism analyst at the Treasury Department, Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here this early morning. I wonder what you think comes next. That is the big question, I think, facing the entire world today.
Absolutely, Jonathan. Look, I think the first thing is that the Israelis, I think, are breathing a sigh of relief. As you noted, that 99% shoot-down rate was, I think, an incredible testament to the Israeli missile defense system, that three-layered system of what they call Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow. All three systems appeared to be clicking last night. And I would also say that the regional architecture was also very successful. The fact that you had the U.S. shooting down some of these drones and missiles from bases abroad. The Brits shot down several from planes that were scrambled out of Cyprus. The Jordanians shot them down. So what you've done is you've taken off some of the pressure from Israel to respond immediately, despite the fact that a handful, perhaps one or two, got through last night. But now there is the question of what to do internally in Israel. They had a cabinet meeting yesterday, apparently weighing the possible responses. They don't need to act immediately. Of course, the Iranians waited more than a week to respond to Israel's most recent attack, to all of the Iranian aggression that preceded that. So I think the Israelis do have some time if they want. The conversation between Netanyahu and President Biden last night, I think, was probably the pivotal one, because there is that question now of whether Biden supports a full-blown Israeli response. I think there's no question that the Israelis believe that a full-throated response is warranted right now from the Israeli side. It's really a question now of, are the U.S. and Israel aligned totally, partially, or not at all? And I think we'll be learning about that soon enough.
What do you think a full-throated, as you put it, response in the eyes of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet might mean? Does that mean hitting Iran's nuclear facilities? Does it mean taking out part of the Islamic Republic's leadership in Tehran even, or something far lower level than that, Jonathan?
Well, from what we understand last night, one Israeli base in southern Israel was hit. I think that certainly would be responded to in kind, but I think we could be looking at potential oil refineries, other oil facilities, different kinds of bases associated with the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the organization that has been coordinating the activities of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Shiite militias that have been attacking for the last 6 months, unchecked aggression from the Islamic Republic. But then, as you note, there is this opportunity. We have not seen a direct strike on Israel from Iran, really, for decades. I don't think it's ever happened, for that matter. And so what this does is it opens up opportunities for the Israeli military to potentially strike that nuclear program that we've all been talking about for the better part of 15 years. The Israelis know exactly what they want to strike. They've been working on plans to do so. To some weird extent right now, this does open up an opportunity for Israel to engage in the way that perhaps it's been fearful of doing over the last 15 years because of this direct action out of Iran. Iran is no longer hiding behind those proxies in, I think, what has been a rather craven way of fighting war. They've been fighting Israel to the last Syrian and Lebanese and Gazan for years now. Now the Israelis do have that opportunity, pursuant to international law, to respond exactly as they would wish and to target strategic entities within the Islamic Republic.
Do you think there's any reality to the theory, Jonathan, that Iran, the leadership of Iran was trying to save face here? They telegraphed this attack. They sent drones. They said, hey, these drones are on the way. They'll take several hours to get there. They know very well how good Israel's air defense systems are. Do you think they were just trying to say to their people, look what we are doing. We are taking this huge action against Israel. And after all, the Iranian people don't get a lot of information other than that which comes through the state media there. So they can say, look what we're doing, but they didn't really want to invite a big reaction. Any reality in that theory, do you think?
Look, they were clearly trying to hedge last night. The statement that they issued saying that they consider this matter complete after their strike is over. They're clearly saying we don't want to get hit. We're hoping that this is ending here. But I think it's fiction. I think they're lying to themselves that you could fire hundreds of drones and cruise missiles at Israel and not expect a response in this part of the world in particular, where deterrence is crucial. So I think that it was not something that was possible.
How significant, Jonathan, do you think it was that we did not see any significant action from Hezbollah up in Lebanon? Because one would think if Iran is launching any major attack on Israel and it really wanted to do any damage, the easiest way for the Iranians to do that is to say to Hezbollah, their proxies there, fire hundreds of those very powerful missiles that you have from Lebanon into Israel. But we didn't see that. Is that significant at all?
It is. The Hezbollah could have fired what they call PGMs, the precision-guided munitions that they have been amassing. Had they done that, that would have been, I think, the precipitating factor for an all-out war in the Middle East. But I would say that this was probably the second most drastic step that the regime could have taken. By firing hundreds of missiles and drones out of Iran, it was about as fierce of an escalation as one could have expected under the current environment, other than perhaps those PGMs or maybe just a multifaceted, multi-front saturation attack. I truly believe that last night was a test. I believe that the Iranians were trying to see whether Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow were able to work in concert, whether Israel's airspace was hermetically sealed or close to hermetically sealed. I think the Iranians did find that the Israelis performed well beyond what they would have expected. I think that they now understand that trying to attack Israel from abroad is a fool's errand. And certainly Israel got help from the rest of the regional architecture that has been built by CENTCOM, Central Command, over these years. And so I think Iran may have realized, okay, this is not something that we can do. Maybe Hezbollah is the only real effective tool against Israel, given the proximity. But then, of course, that means that if a war erupts between Israel and Hezbollah, that Iran will lose its most powerful proxy, because the Israelis certainly have Hezbollah outmatched. I do think this was testing the water. It was poking and prodding. I think Iran got its answer, but I'm not sure that the Israelis are going to let it end there. That message in response, that determination on Israel's part to ensure deterrence is a key part of the psychological component of this war, and that will play out in the next few days or perhaps weeks.
Jonathan, if we're on, let's say, a 0 to 10 scale, 10 being, as you put it, an all-out war in the Middle East, let's say we were currently sitting at a 5 24 hours ago, where are we now on a scale of 0 to 10?
You know, it's a hard thing to note. I think watching Israeli media over the last several hours, I would say that they have no question in their mind that a response is needed in response to these attacks in Iran, that Iran needs to be attacked. So absolutely, this has escalated. If it was a 5 before, it's probably at least a 7 or an 8. I would say, though, that the temperature is not as high, given that nothing significant was hit or damaged. As I understand it, there was a 10-year-old Bedouin boy, a young girl that was injured as well. But what it could have been a lot worse. And so I think it's for that reason that cooler heads are prevailing. But you have to remember something, Jonathan. This has been the norm now in Israel, that it's Israeli technology that has been intercepting Hamas rockets, Hezbollah rockets, Houthi rockets. That's what has allowed for cooler heads to prevail. It is a false sense of security. It's not something that's sustainable when you're dealing with enemies of Israel that are dedicated to its destruction. There were actually calls in the Iranian parliament today where in unison the parliamentarians were cheering death to Israel. The Israelis are keenly aware of the atmospherics, and they're going to want to make a statement.
Right. Okay. Jonathan Schanzer, wonderful to talk to you and get all of your insights. Jonathan, thank you so much. So here is where we are now. We await the Israeli decision on how they will react to having 300 missiles and drones fired at them